The Star Ledger explained that Ronald Davidson, for example, had been brought up on tenure charges because he was accused of not allowing disabled students to ride an elevator and because he was accused of sexual harassment. That was one of their sources. His bias against the board was not disclosed. Did the Star Ledger explain that Frank Cuesta has been serving with Mayor Bolwidge on the city council for almost a decade? That Frank Cuesta was a councilman who voted for that shady land deal that the city council had to revoke? Did the Star Ledger explain that in that same year there was a testimonial dinner for Frank Cuesta, sponsored by Senator Lesniak and Mayor Bolwidge, and where the dinner chairman was Louis Rodriguez, the guy who was supposed to buy the land? Star Ledger never told their readers that. And we have citations in the report to the most responsible journalistic ethic standards that guide newspapers all over the country and make it crystal clear that if you have a biased source, your obligation is to disclose the source's bias. And that didn't happen. And we outline the bias of every single one of those 7 sources. And because that fundamental principle of journalism was violated, we conclude that the Ledger's reliance on those sources was inconsistent with well-accepted journalistic principles, and that their allegations of political pressure simply are bogus. They're unsubstantiated, and they're not reliable. In the recommendations section of the report, as I said, we talk about the dinners and fundraising events since 2003. And we single out 2 events that I found to be troublesome. One was a dinner honoring Rafael Fajardo in 2010, and one was a dinner honoring Superintendent Munoz in 2011. And what I found troubling about both events was that both events had a host committee that consisted of a large number of administrators from the school system. And I said that even though public employees have a clear First Amendment right to participate in elections, that it didn't look good and that appearances matter. It looked as if this was a Board of Education event because there were so many administrators involved. And I recommended strongly to the board that in the future they adopt whatever steps they need to take to make sure that large numbers of administrators do not band together to form a host committee for political fundraisers, because the board should not appear to be involved in fundraising events like that. I also recommend that key leaders of the school system, like the superintendent, should not be honorees, and obviously, to comply with law, that none of the solicitation can take place during school hours or on school premises or with the use of school facilities. And then I have a little conclusion. And in the conclusion, I point out that in 1992, the court on which I served held for the first time, after 50 years of underfunding of urban school districts, that students in poor school districts had to be provided with funding that was at least equal to the funding of the students in the wealthiest school districts, and that in addition, they had to provide funding for supplemental programs like preschool and kindergarten. And in the report, I point out that when we made that decision, the Star Ledger supported the Supreme Court of New Jersey. And I quote from the Star Ledger editorial in 1992 supporting the notion that poor urban school districts should be given extra funding and extra programs to give their school children a fair chance to compete. And then I ask a question. that with over 500 school districts in New Jersey, and here is Elizabeth, a paradigm of the kind of district that our court thought could benefit from adequate funding, a school district that has demonstrated that with enough funding and good leadership, it can provide its children with extraordinary chances for educational progress. Why would the Star Ledger single out this district for such a hostile, savage, adversary series of articles? I conclude with the observation that the parents of the Elizabeth school children ought to be proud of their school system, and that they justifiably can take pride in the kind of school system that their children attend. Anyhow, I'm sorry for such a long summary. I'll deal with it. My son Mike, who's the managing partner of Pashman Stein, reminds me that I ought to tell you what this report has cost so far, and I will. So far, we've been paid $468,997. That covers our work through November. We have not billed for December or January. I haven't seen the January bill. The December bill looks like it's in the neighborhood of $85,000, but we will bill for December and January and February when our work is done. I ought to say, in connection with the bills, if the Star Ledger had not written such a distorted series of articles, we would not have had to spend so much time trying to clear up the incorrect impression that those articles created. And from the Elizabeth Board's perspective, they were very concerned that after all of their work and all of their effort, they did not want the parents of their school children to lose confidence in the school system. And they felt that the effort that was to be made by our law firm and the expenditure of funds was justified. I'd be happy to answer any questions.